Good morning. Today is October 10th. I don't know what day it is. Today is October 10th. This is a Thursday, October 10th. This is a 10 a.m. work session with the Larimer County Board of Commissioners and our Public Works Department. I'm Commissioner Steve Johnson. I'm joined by Commissioner Lou Gator and Commissioner Tom Donnelly and County Manager Linda Hoffman and a number of other staff people that you'll be hearing from this morning. As you all know, last month Larimer County was hit with probably the most devastating flood in history to hit our county, following 1 year ago the most devastating wildfire to hit Larimer County. We are very well aware that a number of individuals lost their homes in both of those events, and many homes were damaged in both of those events, and many individuals are still unable to have access to their homes and get to their homes. And we are very much aware how frustrating that is for individuals and how concerning that is for communities in Larimer County that very much want to get life back to normal. One of the highest priorities for Larimer County, other than protecting life and public safety, is repairing the road infrastructure that was damaged by the flood event and also by the fire event in the year before. Our Road and Bridge Department has done an outstanding job of assessing the damage and coming up with a plan to get access for individuals so that folks can get back into their homes, communities can rebuild and come back together and reconnect with the great state of Colorado. So this morning we're going to have an update on the work that has progressed so far, and I believe County Manager Linda Hoffman, are you going to start the proceedings?
I'd be happy to, Commissioner. I think that it would be a good thing to just have all the staff in the room introduce themselves. That way, as we get to questions, we'll have that behind us. So I'm Linda Hoffman, the County Manager, and we'll start down the podium this way.
I'm Mark Engemoen, the county's Public Works Director.
I'm Mark Peterson, the County Engineer.
I'm Rusty McDaniel, the Assistant County Engineer.
I'm Todd Jurgens, the Construction Manager.
Janine, you're next. Dale, you're up.
Dale Miller, Road and Bridge Director. Can you unplug it? Bill Nelson, Undersheriff.
Neil Gluckner, Assistant County Manager.
Bob Keister, Budget Director.
Eric Tracy with the Engineering Department.
Jane Visty, Public Information.
Jerry Gilbert, Community Development Director.
Ron Winnie, Engineering Department.
Brian Frayton, Engineering Department.
Martina Wilkinson, Traffic Engineer.
Matt Johnson, Engineering Department.
So this is a work session that has been a long time in processing, and yet at the same time it's been very short in assembling a very short time frame to assemble the information needed to have this. The Public Works Department has been simultaneously working on assessing the damage while they are redoubling efforts to repair damage. So I'll just turn it over to Mark Engemoen, Public Works Director, and let him walk us through the information he has for your consideration today.
Thanks, Linda. As Linda said, this work session has maybe been a long time in coming. Perhaps we should have been here earlier talking to you about what we've been doing. When people didn't see us right in their neighborhood, when they didn't see us in their area, I think in some ways they assumed we weren't out doing anything, and we were. We just weren't there at that time. So I do accept some of the fault for not communicating on a more timely basis. I don't think I can really fault our staff for not doing enough, but I do fault us for not, and fault myself for not telling you quickly enough about what we're doing. So I appreciate the opportunity to spend a little time with you today, really talking about what we did in response to these floods and where we're going. More importantly, how we're going to get to eventual recovery. I never seem to be able to stump Commissioner Johnson with questions about history or anything else, but he probably knows this quote. The Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy said, "Happy families are all alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way." And what he's really saying is every disaster is unique. When things are going fine, they're all going fine and everybody's on the same plane. But disasters, when things go wrong, there's an infinite number of ways for them to go wrong, and every one is different. Some people have been comparing this flood in September of 2013 to the 1976 flood, and it's a totally, totally different type of event. Having had a front row seat to the 76 flood, it was a very different flood. It was a very intense flood, very short duration. The water came up, and it came up big time, and then it went down again. It was a very intense, low duration flood over a relatively small area. I mean, really centered. That cell was centered over the Big Thompson. We had heavy rains. We had some flood damage in other parts of the county, but really it was much more centered in the Big Thompson Canyon. This flood, in comparison, was, as you probably know, totally different. This was a flood of much greater duration. It rained maybe not as intensely for a short period of time, but it rained a lot over a much longer period of time. So we had more sustained flows. I mean, the rivers came up and they stayed up. And the damage that resulted was much more extensive. This storm was over a broader area over a longer period of time. So instead of the very intense high velocity flows we had in the Big Thompson flood in '76, these were long duration, and they had more time to eat away at the roads. They had more time to eat away at the hillsides. So we have much more erosion, in my opinion, than we had back in '76. We lost more roads. They simply had more time to get eaten up as the river reclaimed some of these narrow canyons that we had settled over the last century. And as I said, it's much bigger in scale. About half the county was impacted by this flood. Everything from the Poudre River south to the Boulder County line, and everything from I-25 over to the Estes Valley. So we had a much broader area that was impacted, and certainly the most populous area of the county. So any comparisons with other floods are interesting, but not necessarily meaningful, because this was so unique in terms of its damage, and also then unique in terms of how we needed to respond to it. I think in some ways, even folks like FEMA are finding that this was unique. They are encountering issues with this particular disaster that are different than other disasters that they've seen elsewhere. Even with the same storm, like I said, every unhappy, or like Tolstoy said, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. This same storm resulted in very different flood impacts and very different responses from one location to another. Here in Colorado, we weren't the only county affected. We weren't the only local government affected. Certainly Weld County didn't have the high velocity erosive flows in their mountain canyons that we had. But on the other hand, we didn't have a mile-wide floodplain with tanks from the oil and gas industry spilling into that floodplain. So they had different issues, different damages, different problems than we have. And as a result, their response to that is different. So it's interesting to note how other places responded to the same flood, but it's not really an apples-to-apples comparison. We needed to respond in a unique way. Our response doesn't look like Weld County's response. Our response doesn't look like the City of Loveland's response, because the damages are so different. I think the town of Estes Park did an absolutely fantastic job cleaning up their roads, cleaning a foot or more of mud off their roads really quickly, right after the storm passed. But they had a completely different type of damage than the community of Glen Haven. There was no road left to clean mud off in Glen Haven. So even in a very small change in location, the damage was very different, and the response was very different. So just wanted to kind of give you some context, or give folks some context about how very unique this was, different than anything else we ever experienced before. So our response was different than anything we had ever done before. We had learned some lessons in responding to other emergencies like the fire, but this one created some unique situations, and so our response was very different. So what was our response in the very early days? Actually, our first response to this storm came even a week before the actual flood. As Commissioner Johnson knows, sometimes great battles start with small skirmishes. 150 years ago this summer, Union and Confederate forces actually bumped into each other accidentally at Gettysburg. And then for the next 3 days in July, probably one of the most monumental battles in American history took place. We had that same thing with this flood. Back in earlier in September, around September 6th, we were working on County Road 27, close to the Poudre Canyon, up between Stove Prairie and the Poudre Canyon. And we were trying to armor some of the side slopes on County Road 27 because we were really concerned about the high potential for floods in that area after the High Park fire, particularly up there in an area we call Skin Gulch. So we were out there placing large riprap, 24-inch stones in the channel along that roadway. And about September 6th, a storm came along, a very localized storm there in Skin Gulch, and just picked up those 24-inch stones and pushed them down the river, or pushed them down that channel as if they were a child's marbles. And so we had a crew up there. We had a contractor, Connell Resources, up there helping us with that project at that time. And we immediately started bringing in much larger stone, things that are more like 36, 48-inch stones to put along the bottom of that slope. So that was our initial skirmish with this flood. And then from there, just like Gettysburg unfolded, it got bigger and far, far worse. We collided head on with all the forces of nature over a much broader area. But my point in this story is we were already in that area before the real flood hit. So after the floodwaters started to recede after the major flood, that's where we had equipment already staged. We had contractors right there in that upper part of County Road 27, and that's where our response initially started. We immediately started clearing 2 to 3 feet of sand and gravel off of the road. The road was completely covered. We started trying to repair some of those damaged side slopes. So our initial response started right there where we had already been staged and where we were already working. Now from there, we moved down to the lower part of 27 because in that area, the major flood cut the road in about 6 to 8 places, just completely tore the road up, tore out the culverts, and we had these big gaps in the road system that we had to try to get in and begin filling. So we started staging material that we were pulling off of the upper half of County Road 27, bringing that down to the lower portion and starting to fill in some of these pieces of the roadway that were completely demolished. And our goal was to try to restore access to the property owners whose access was completely cut off. So we put down a couple of low water crossings. The crossing was completely gone, the road was completely gone. We put in a couple of 36-inch culverts temporarily. We put a low water crossing over that. And with a couple of those low water crossings, we were able to restore access to all of the properties along that section of road that had their access completely eliminated. So that was our next step, was to go from the upper portion of County Road 27 down to the lower portion. Now, through the Narrows, there are still about 6 places where the road is cut completely, and we just left those as they were. We had accomplished our primary mission, which was to restore access to those property owners, but then we needed to move on to other property owners whose access was still cut off, rather than try to make a continuous roadway through there. So County Road 27 The lower Buckhorn Canyon is still closed. There are still major sections of road that are completely gone. There are still half a dozen cuts in that road that we're just leaving for now while we've moved on to other emergency areas. That's part of what we'll come back to for our permanent repairs. One of the hardest hit roads in this area was the upper Buckhorn Canyon, County Road 44H. And Mark can probably scroll around the map and show you these areas as we're talking about it. But this was an area where about 8 miles of County Road 44H was just obliterated. The stream, the Buckhorn Creek, essentially reclaimed that little narrow canyon for its own, that little narrow valley for its own, and just obliterated the road. We here had a number of areas that were cut off. When that road disappeared, we had a number of communities that were isolated, particularly up on the upper end, Crystal Mountain. So one of our big goals was to try to restore access along this section of 44H. We started our contractor, Connell Resources, earlier this week from the lower end, starting to build up. At the same time, Connell brought in another contractor, Native Excavating, to start working from the upper end down. And we have made tremendous progress just in the course of the last 3 days, to the point where we've restored access to Crystal Mountain. That neighborhood that was completely cut off, we now have access to them. They can come back up on the upper portion of 44H and get back to the Pingree Park Road, and they have access, which they did not have earlier this week. Our goal is to try to create a haul road up that entire road, try to get at least a haul road, a temporary road, up that whole section, that 8 miles that was obliterated, by early next week. I think the contractor has hopes of even having that accomplished maybe by this weekend, but certainly by next week, we hope to have a temporary road up through that, just a gravel road. And that's going to be just a temporary road. That's not the permanent repairs, but that is at least going to be the kind of emergency repair that we're going to be able to try to maintain during the winter and make sure that folks have access continuously until we can come back in and do some more permanent repairs. At the same time that we were working on County Road 27, the upper and lower Buckhorn, we certainly had a lot of damage to our bridges on the lower Thompson in the Berthoud area, the little Thompson in the Berthoud area. Our response there was delayed a little bit because we had these sustained high flows in the channel, and we had to wait until those storm waters receded a little bit to be able to get inspectors up there and actually look at the foundations of those bridges and determine whether or not they were structurally sound or not. So that took us a little bit of time to wait for those waters to recede before we could really get in there, analyze those structures, and if they were still sound, we could go ahead and backfill the approaches and open them up to traffic. But we didn't want to backfill those approaches and have people start driving over structures that we didn't believe or didn't know were safe. So we didn't backfill them until we had a green light on some of those structures. Once we got that green light, we started right away rebuilding those structures rebuilding those approaches for the structures that were undamaged. Some of them have already opened to traffic. Others we're working on right now, and we're going to get every one of those structures that we can open as quickly as we can. We could not do it faster than we did because, as I said, we needed to wait until we made sure the public was safe in crossing those before we tried to get them reopened. There are some structures that are completely damaged, will need to be replaced. If you have questions about our bridges and our structures, Ron Winnie, our bridge engineer, is here to answer those questions if you have more detailed questions later. If not, I'll just kind of breeze through that and move on to some of the other areas. One of the hard-hit areas, of course, was the Big Thompson, was the Estes Valley. And we weren't able to respond as quickly as perhaps people wanted us to in the Estes Valley for a couple of reasons. One is we had limited resources, limited staff, limited contractors, and so we were really busy those first days and weeks of the response. Number one, with our own staff, just going ahead and trying to get a good assessment of all the damages, trying to find out where all the damages were so that we could start prioritizing these repairs, trying to find out where were people stranded, where were communities isolated, so that we could create some priorities for getting in there and initially establishing or reestablishing access. At the same time, as I said, we had our contractors busy down here in the Buckhorn and other areas doing some of the initial response work. The other thing that needed to take place in the Estes Valley, though, was we needed to give our partners like CDOT and the National Guard a chance to get in there and establish a foothold. Just the other day, Todd and I were up in the upper part of the Glenhaven Road, just below Glenhaven, trying to hike down to the retreat. And it is an extremely, extremely tough environment up there to try to hike along that road. You'll be able to hike along a small section, and then all of a sudden it drops into just a field of boulders. And so we were trying to make our way down, trying to figure out how difficult it would be to get contractors in there and how we could even start to do the work. So Todd had me scrambling up slopes and climbing boulders and things that I probably had no business doing. But one of the things I figured out very quickly was, don't start thinking about that next step. How are you going to push yourself over that next boulder until you've got a firm foothold right where you are? That's what we needed to do to attack some of the roads in the Estes Valley. We needed to start from a good foothold before we could start pushing our way up. In the case of Big Elk Meadows, County Road 47, that was pretty simple. The foothold was at Highway 36 because you couldn't get to the upper end. On the Buckhorn Canyon Road, we could start from both ends because both ends were accessible. There was no way to start from the upper end of County Road 47 because we couldn't get heavy equipment there. We couldn't get manpower there. There was nothing for us to do up at the top end. So we had to wait until the National Guard got up 36 far enough to give us that foothold at the base of the Big Elk Meadows Road at the start of County Road 47. So we have a contractor, Gerard Excavating, poised to, we've got equipment up there, equipment that they brought in from other states, other areas of the county. They're ready to begin work on Monday. We also had to wait a little bit to give our partners a chance to help us. You know, remember when you're in the giving the flight instructions for the airline, and they say in the case there's a crash, you know, make sure you put your mask on first before you try to help somebody else. The same thing happens with our partners like CDOT and the National Guard. We had to give them a chance to get their mask on first before we could really ask them to help us. And that's exactly what the National Guard did. They got in there, they got to Big Elk Meadows, they got to County Road 47. And then, in addition, they were able to give us a push. Just earlier this week, we met with CDOT and Colonel Tran, who's in charge of the National Guard up there, and those folks, our partners, said, hey, here's what we can do for you. We've got some 7x7, 12-foot long concrete box culvert. We will make this available to you. We'll haul it up there at no cost, or at like $10 a section. And the National Guard said, we have to concentrate on County Road 36. We have to be, you know, really focused on 36, but we will peel off a small group of people and get that first crossing done for you. That first crossing of the Little Thompson. We'll use those 7x7 box culverts, and we'll give you that first push up the road so that on Monday your contractor can get started on that, like I said, that real solid foothold. So that's what's happening. I think the concrete box culverts are being delivered tomorrow. The National Guard is going down to Denver, picking those up, delivering those to Big Elk Meadows. And on Saturday, the National Guard troops are going to be installing those at that first crossing. And then on Monday, our contractor, Gerard, is going to be over that first hurdle, which is no small hurdle if you've been up there, but getting over that first crossing is going to give us the push uphill that we really need to make good progress up on County Road 47. I don't know how quickly we'll be able to repair that road. It really takes us about a week of our contractor working in there to get a sense of how difficult is this, how much rock are we encountering, because some of these roads have just been scoured down to bedrock, to nothing left but rock and 6 or 7 foot boulders. That's what I was climbing over, Todd and I were scrambling over in in Glenhaven. So some of these are very, very tough environments for a contractor to work in, and it may take us a little while to figure out how much progress we're really going to be able to make. So I won't try to give you any kind of estimates today on how quickly we're going to be up County Road 47 with a temporary road, with some low water crossings, and how quickly we're going to be able to follow up with some 36-inch culverts, or some improvements that have a chance of holding up over the winter. But all I can do is assure you we and our contractors are doing everything we can to make those kind of repairs happen as quickly and as safely as we can. Elsewhere in the Estes Valley, one of the really big challenges was the County Road 43, the road from Drake up to Glenhaven and then Glenhaven up to Estes. Particularly that lower section from Drake to Glenhaven, that was almost totally destroyed. There are, again, little sections of the road left, and then you'll run into you can't even tell if there was ever a road there. Just terrific damage, extremely severe, certainly the worst damage to a road I've ever seen in my career. We really needed to get a foothold at Drake, at the bottom of that road, and work our way uphill for a variety of reasons. The most important reason being that's where the material was for us to build this temporary road. Up on the upper end, as I said, when Todd and I were scrambling around there the other day, it is absolutely scoured clean. There is no material, no evidence at all of the roadbed that used to be there. Instead, there's a hole in the ground 6 to 8 feet deep that needs to be filled up to rebuild that roadway. There just isn't enough material in that area for us to bring a contractor in and make good progress in that area. The damage was just too severe on that lower end, on that upper end. On the lower end, as it flattens out, I'm sure you're familiar with the bottom of that valley where it ties into County Road 34. The flood started depositing some of that sand, some of that gravel and cobbles, some of that material that we needed to start building the roadway. So as soon as CDOT's contractor, Kiewit, was able to come down from Estes to Drake, they gave us access. They gave us that important foothold in Drake. And our contractor, Connell Resources, grabbed onto that foothold and started pushing up that canyon, up County Road 43, or where County Road 43 had been immediately. Just in the first 2 days, they got 3,500 feet, a little under 7/10 of a mile up that road, which doesn't sound like a whole lot. That's about 6 miles up to Drake, but in that first 7/10 of a mile, we were able to restore access to Storm Mountain, to the neighborhoods in Cedar Park and Cedar Springs that before then had been completely cut off. So that first, 3,500 feet made a huge difference in terms of restoring access to the people who were trapped in the Cedar Park, Cedar Springs area. I wish we could make as fast a progress for some of the other areas. The retreat up on the upper end of Glenhaven is kind of in the same boat. They're stranded. One of the reasons we started from the lower end is, as I said, Connell was able to get 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet of road done in a day. If we put those same resources up at the top end of Glenhaven, in my opinion, I think we'd be lucky to get 200 or 300 feet a day. So for the limited resources we had to put them in that place where we could do the most good in the shortest amount of time. I think that has been difficult for some people to understand. If I was a resident in the retreat, my highest priority would be getting access to the retreat. I understand that completely. But we had to make some strategic choices about where to deploy our resources and when to get the most bang for our buck. We're working diligently. I'd love to give you a good idea on when we're going to have a pioneered road all the way up from Drake to Glenhaven. But like Big Elk Meadows, at this point in time, I can't give you an estimate for that. I do have, I think, some extremely good news in that regard, and that is, again, We had to give our partners a chance to get their feet from out underneath them as well, to get their mask on so they could help us first. One of those key partners, or two of those key partners, are the Colorado Department of Transportation, and then more recently, the Central Federal Lands Highway Division under FHWA. Had a meeting with those folks, with CDOT and FHWA Federal Lands just earlier this week, and it looks like there's an opportunity for Central Federal Lands to come in and play an absolutely crucial role in taking over the design of the permanent repairs on County Road 43. And they have expertise, they have resources they can call on that we don't have in staff, and that frankly consultants don't even have. I mean, they have an ability to get to the right people, ask the right questions, bring in expertise that can happen much faster, I believe, than we can do in any other way. They also are a partnership with other federal lands, the Forest Service and things like that. One of the problems I mentioned earlier on the upper end of the Glen Haven Road is the lack of material. I think Central Federal Lands is in a position to talk to other federal agencies like the Forest Service to see about creating some borrow sites possibly, and creating opportunities to get urgently needed material that currently just isn't available up there. So Jeff Jerome from Central Federal Lands is here. I'd like to have him talk to you a little bit about this opportunity to partner with them in a couple minutes. But I think that's an extremely good piece of news for us, that this period of time has allowed some of our partners to identify opportunities for them to do more than just give us a push up the road, to really create a partnership that's going to make things happen in the Estes Valley much more effectively than we could struggling on our own. One of the other roads in the Estes Valley is Fish Creek. One of the difficulties with Fish Creek or County Road 63 is there are a lot of utilities in that road right away. There's a sanitary sewer, there are water lines, there are high and low pressure gas lines. There's a lot of spaghetti in there associated with the utilities. It's extremely important for us to not just go in there and wipe out all those utilities and build our roadway. That's more of a surgical operation than just what the National Guard is doing. In fact, we talked to Colonel Tran of the National Guard about the possibility of using them to accelerate progress on Fish Creek. And he said very frankly, that's not what we do. We go in there and we bulldoze in roads. We don't do fine work, the kind of work that needs to take place around those utilities. So the nice thing about a partnership with federal lands and CDOT on County Road 43 is we can take that off our plate in terms of us taking a lead role, and we can apply our resources then to Fish Creek, to creating that kind of partnership, that relationship with the utilities and Estes Park, and accelerate progress that we can make on Fish Creek. So some of these partnerships are coming together in a way that they weren't ready to come together several weeks ago. Before we spend a little bit more time talking with Jeff Jerome about federal lands, let me just briefly run through some of the things that are still obstacles for us. Limited resources is still a problem, and it's not just manpower and equipment. Like I said earlier, we're working with our contractors. They're bringing in people from other parts of the county. They're bringing in equipment from other parts of the state. Can't say enough good things about our existing contractors, Connell Resources and Girard Excavating. They have really stepped up to try to go out of their way to find additional resources, to honor their contracts with us, and to be our force account work, because we're not geared up. Our Road and Bridge Department doesn't have the kind of construction capability that these guys have. That's why we had existing contracts with them, that when we needed them to step in quickly, like in an emergency, they were there to do it for us. And I'll tell you, they have been lights out. I cannot say enough good things about the way they've responded to our needs and to the needs of our community. But it's not just men and equipment that we need to respond, it's also materials. And again, because Estes Park is so isolated, you can't get materials up there quickly. Materials are having to be brought in from Lyons on 36 now as the National Guard moves up. That's not inexpensive, and it's a slow process to try to bring all those materials into the area. So we're working on those things, trying to keep CDOT going and not interfere with their efforts to, keep making progress on 36 and 34. That is good for us because the quicker we can get access to vital materials, the better, because we need those materials to move forward. So resources are an obstacle. Every day it gets a little better. Every day we have more equipment. Every day we have more manpower. Every day we have a little closer access to vital materials that we need, but it's still a slow process. Environmental factors are also a problem. I wish this flood had happened in May, and we would have all summer long to work on some of these roads, but it isn't May 1st. It's October 10th, and winter is knocking on the door. And winter construction is slower and more difficult and more costly than construction in summer. That's an obstacle that we need to work through. Can't change the time of year, can't change the weather, can't control the weather. So there are some obstacles like equipment and manpower that we can work on, but there are other obstacles like environmental considerations that we really can't control. We just have to live within the constraints. We have to live with what the weather hands us. There are some other environmental issues that frankly scare me to death. Unlike the Big Thompson flood, because we had these sustained rains over such a long period of time in such a large area, we're seeing some landslides that we never saw in '76. If you drive down the section of 34 from Estes Park to Drake, you'll see some of those landslides along the Big Thompson Canyon that we didn't have after the '76 flood. If you come into Estes like Commissioners Donnelly and Gator and I did the other day, huge landslide above the Aspen Winds Lodge that we didn't see in '76. Big earth movements. Down on County Road 43, that road was originally built by taking material off the adjacent slopes, and some of those slopes were left pretty steep. Now we're starting to see those fairly steep slopes slide. There are some areas that are frankly just downright scary. We need to really be careful about the equipment that we bring in there and how much access we give to just the ordinary public in there, because just like we saw with that rock slide in the Buena Vista area, we've got some unstable slopes because of these storms that we didn't have before, and I would hate to have more loss of life in the recovery effort than we had in the disaster itself. But that is a possibility if we're not careful and thoughtful about where we're working and how we're working. And those are some environmental problems that are going to slow us down in some cases while we try to figure out how to deal with them. Speaking of environmental issues, we have a categorical exclusion for some of the NEPA process, some of the environmental constraints, or I shouldn't say constraints, the environmental processes that they have to go through when you're doing construction work. But as we get into permanent repairs, we are going to have to go through, I think, the NEPA process. We are going to have to get the environmental clearances. Those can sometimes be slow processes. I mentioned earlier we were working up in Skin Gulch, trying to get the stream armored up there before the storm really started. That work we could have started about 2 to 3 months earlier, but we were waiting for the environmental clearances. Those things take time. Now I'm hoping that given the broad nature of this disaster, that we are going to see some expedited NEPA processes, that working with some of our partners, we're going to see some of those environmental clearances go faster. But to the extent that we have to comply with all of those requirements, which we do, that is possibly going to slow down some of this permanent repair work. Like I said, we have a categorical exclusions for some of the emergency response work. But as we get into permanent repairs, that is going to be a slower process because of some of the regulations that we're going to need to go through. We're also going to have to slow down a little bit to make sure that we dot our I's and cross our T's with respect to all of the processes for getting reimbursed. Our estimate for the repair costs, the permanent repair costs to damaged county roads and bridges, not highways, But just county roads and bridges is about $90 million, $89 million. We don't have $89 million to spend on those repairs. We must get reimbursement whenever possible, as much as possible. And we have to do it in a way that's going to keep the money flowing, that we're going through the right processes, as I said, dotting I's and crossing T's, so that once we complete work and we submit it for reimbursement, it goes through the federal processes as quickly as it can and the state processes, and we get money back into our coffers, and we can use that money to keep moving down the road. So we need to go slowly enough that we're complying with all the requirements to make sure that the money keeps flowing and that we're able to get reimbursed as much as we can in as timely a fashion as we can. That takes time. It takes time not only for the people in the field who are having to document very carefully all the work that's being done and how it's being done. It also takes time for the people back here in the courthouse, our accountants and our consultants, to process those, advise us, and make sure that all that goes smoothly. But we need to take the time and be careful and thoughtful about those processes to keep the money flowing. There are some other issues out there. I just want to make you aware of it. Not all of the work that is taking place, not all of the damage took place just in the narrow confines of the public right-of-way. The flood was pretty indiscriminate about where it dropped gravel and cobbles and rock and where landslides are taking place. Some of that's taking place on private property. We need to get in. We need to have access to those private properties, both for emergency repairs and for permanent improvements. We're very thoughtful and sensitive about working on private property. I know private property rights are very important to you as public officials because it's important to your citizens. There are some things that we can do because we're in an emergency situation in terms of getting onto private property and removing some materials that we need to build our roads. But as we start transitioning into permanent repairs, we need to be careful about getting construction easements, getting agreements with property owners if we're going to be taking material off private property, compensating them for that where it's appropriate. All of those things take time, as I think you're well aware. Right-of-way negotiations, when it gets down to us negotiating one-on-one with the myriad property owners who are involved in this, that's not a fast process. It's a necessary process, but it's not a fast process. But I think it's a process that your direction to us in the past has been, do take property rights very seriously and be careful and be very considerate and thoughtful about how we deal with private citizens in terms of their properties. It's impossible to build the road exactly as it was before. In some cases, we're going to have to try to improve the situation. The side slopes that I mentioned earlier that are now dangerous, we can't put them back the way we were. We may need to reinforce them with retaining walls or gabion baskets, baskets with riprap in them. We may need to make some betterments that end up with a better road than we had before to try to avoid repeat flood damage and to just get back to a maintainable situation. The process of going through and explaining how we need to invest more money than just repairs, doing the cost-benefit analysis, that's a little bit slower process, but it's something we need to do. There are some costs that we are not going to get completely reimbursed for. It's going to take us a little bit of time to figure out what those costs are and to get direction from you about where do you want to make investments for the public's benefit that we are not going to get reimbursed for. I'll just give you a couple of examples. As we are working our way up some of these bridges, the bridge may be the bridges that lead into private roads that we don't maintain. The bridge may be sound, but the approaches may be washed out. Kiewit, as the contractor for CDOT, as they're going up the Big Thompson, They're making the connection from Highway 34 to the edge of the bridge. They're filling in that approach. When the approach on the other side of that bridge is washed out, leading up to the private road, should we, as the county, be going in and filling in that approach? There's not a whole lot of advantage to providing access on Highway 34 or on a county road if there is no access then up to the private properties. But at what point is it the public's responsibility to kind of perfect or complete that access versus the private property owners? And it's not a clear, bright, black and white line. If it's not a bridge, if it's a culvert, how far away from the road should we go? If we say, you know, we really do want to try to restore access to people as quickly as we can so they can winterize their homes, take their possessions out, those kinds of things. If it means putting a culvert in on a private road, a non-publicly maintained road, do we do that in the first 50 feet? If it's 50 feet away from a road, is that one that we should be doing? What about 100 feet? What about 167 feet? We don't have answers to all those questions. People are coming out to us and saying, hey, can you just help us with this culvert? If we buy the culvert for you, can you just have your crew come out and for 20 minutes put this culvert in? There are questions like that that we don't have answers to right now. There are two approaches. One of them is that you just give us a blank check with an upper limit saying, you know, we're going to give you $100,000 or $1 million. Use it how you think we can best benefit the citizens on some of these non-publicly maintained road issues. Use your best judgment and try to do as much good as you can, but stay within this budget. That's one approach. The other approach is to come to you on a frequent basis saying, here's what we're running into in this neighborhood. This is the request. This is the cost. Is this something you feel comfortable with? One, as you can imagine, is a much faster process than the other. So if speed of response is important, that first approach where you say this is what we're comfortable spending and giving us a green light to use our best judgment and work with property owners is one way of making that happen faster. The last thing that I'll mention is an obstacle is just expectations. This is, as Commissioner Johnson noted at the very outset, this is a disaster of unprecedented scope. $90 million in permanent repairs, to put this in context, is about 4 or 5 times our annual budget for our Road and Bridge Department. In other words, everything that our Road and Bridge Department does for 12 months, 52 weeks a year, plowing snow, repairing roads, patching, building wider shoulders, everything that they do in the course of an entire year, the damage that we need to repair is 4 or 5 years worth of that level of effort. It's not going to happen overnight. We are going to be trying to make temporary repairs like we have been for several weeks for probably the next 6 months. We are going to be transitioning into more permanent repairs, but I have to be honest with you, some of those permanent repairs are not going to be completed until 2015 in some cases. There are some roads like the filling in this gap in the narrows of the Buckhorn that I feel confident we're going to complete next summer, in the summer of 2014, provided we get through some of the clearances like NEPA fairly quickly. Some of those things are going to be in place and life is going to look more like it did before the flood as early as next summer. Honestly, I think on a road like County Road 43, we're going to get access to people, temporary access. I don't think we're going to do the permanent repairs on County Road 43 until perhaps 2015. I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to do that as quickly as the summer of 2014. I don't think that expectation has registered with people yet. I think the disaster that we've just gone through is like a death in the family. There are stages that people are going to go through. The first one is denial. Like, I can't believe that, you know, why can't you be up here working on my road? I can't believe that there's that much damage everywhere else that you can't be up here fixing my road. Some of it's initially denial. Denial is going to turn to anger. We're expecting that. We're seeing some of that already. And I think we're going to see more of it. It's a stage that we're going to go through, I believe. When people realize that their expectations are not going to be met, perhaps as quickly or in the same way they thought they were going to be, there is going to be an anger phase. As we move maybe out of anger, we're going to get into bargaining. What's it going to take to get my road moved up in the priority? How can we work with you to accelerate this? You know, is there something more we can do? We're doing some of that bargaining now. As I said, property owners are coming out and saying, if I buy the culvert, can you put it in for me? They've moved past denial and skipped anger pretty quickly, and they're into bargaining already. Some of that is going to take place on a larger scale. Ultimately, I hope we get to acceptance. I hope we get to acceptance before the last paving is done 2, maybe 30 months from now. But we will get there. But it's going to be a slow and at times a painful process. Painful for the people who have lost their homes, who have lost their possessions, who aren't going to be fully reimbursed for them. It's going to be an extremely painful process, and I'm sure they're going to feel anger and bargaining a long time before they get to acceptance, if they do. Painful for us as an organization because we are a small organization with limited resources. The best resource we have is a terrific staff and a terrific passion for public service. And so that's going to be what's going to help sustain us in this period. But it is going to be painful for us as well on our way to ultimately giving people what they need. That's probably a more long-winded explanation of where we've been and where we're going than you perhaps wanted, but we hope to have more regular communication with you. Right now, we're kind of catching up for 3 to 4 weeks of not communicating enough. So wanted to take the time to give you the perspective, tell you where we've been and where we're going now. Would really like, if possible, to have Jeff Jerome from Central Federal Lands tell you a little bit more about County Road 43, but would also like to give you the opportunity to ask any questions in more detail of Todd Juergens, who's been our construction manager, Ron Winnie, our bridge manager, or other questions that you have. So really up to you whether you want to hear from Mr. Jerome first or if you want to jump into some more detailed questions.
Yeah, why don't we continue the presentations, Mark, because that might answer some of the questions that would come up.
Okay. The presentation at this point is then really going to be Jeff Jerome, just telling you a little bit about 43.
Welcome, Jeff, and thank you very much for being with us this morning.
Welcome. Good morning, gentlemen. And I'm Jeff Jerome. I'm from the Central Federal Lands Highway Division of the Federal Highway Administration. We have an office located in Lakewood, Colorado, outside the Denver Federal Center. And our headquarters is there, but we have an area of responsibility that covers 14 states. And our normal day-to-day operation is to provide full design and construction activities from environmental to program management on all federal properties. And we partner with all these federal agencies from Bureau, Land Management, Indian Affairs, Department of Defense, Forest Service. And in this case, we have the Rocky Mountain National Park and Estes Park that allows us to provide service to CDOT under the emergency response, under Department of Transportation's FLAP program, Federal Lands Access Program. And US 34 that provides access to Rocky Mountain National Park is a critical aspect to that access. And with the CDOT's effort to reconstruct that, we have worked with CDOT and understand that County Road 43 will be a critical bypass for US 34 and providing access up to Rocky Mountain National Park. Under that criteria, we are allowed to provide assistance and do our efforts in this emergency response. And we've partnered with CDOT to take over the reconstruction of US 36. And County Road 43 is something that is well within our capability to assist and redesign. And that's what we've worked with CDOT and offered Larimer County and worked with your Public Works and County Engineer to assist in that reconstruction.
Are you ready for questions?
Yes.
Mark alluded to, when we get into the permanent repair phase next year, concerns about NEPA process, environmental requirements. Do you have experience with disaster permanent repair work? Are there expedited NEPA processes that might allege some of his fears?
Well, there are some expedited waivers that go with the emergency response protocols. And as long as we continue our construction under the umbrella of emergency relief, some of those efforts with our 404 stormwater permits, things that we customarily develop, category exclusions, we have our own EPA section within our headquarters that are experts at dealing with that across the many different states and with our own NEPA agencies. But there is no secret handshake that's going to waive everything. There's still considerations and respect for the area that has to be, protected.
And how long will that umbrella of emergency response extend in the future? What determines that?
That is kind of disaster specific as work continues, and there is certain days, time limits on certain waivers that we have to work under when we're into waterways and whatnot. So there's a variety of considerations for those, and I really can't give you an answer for one specific day under these. But it would be our intent to get on site and do assessments and really begin our reconstruction efforts right on the heels of the county and the contractors they have in there working now to continue that emergency relief effort.
It needs to be a seamless transition from, we're in emergency response mode right now, so we would like to engage with Central Federal Lands very quickly so that it provides that continuous emergency response. There's no question that we stopped and all of a sudden we're out of the emergency. We need to keep that moving. One of the next steps would be to execute a memorandum of agreement with CDOT and Jeff's group to allow us to get into this process. Jeff didn't mention it, but one of the advantages to working with them is with respect to the local match. It is possible that in working with CDOT and Central Federal Lands, there may not be any local match for the permanent repair work, the emergency repair work and the permanent repair work on County Road 43. That's one of the really significant advantages to us in terms of working with them, in addition to just the fact that this is what these guys do day in, day out. This is the kind of work that they're absolute experts at.
So I guess one of the questions I have is, if you are able to take the lead on the repairs on County Road 43, and Mark, I understand that you had concerns about us getting done probably realistically in 2015 as opposed to 2014 there, but I'm wondering, is there any chance that helps bring that up, or are we just dealing with just sheer physical logistics and there's nothing that speeds that up?
Well, without having an on-site assessment of our engineers there, it'd be tough to set a timeline. But that is a first step goal that Mark and I talked about for next week, to get on the ground and start a deadline and timetables that could accelerate that 2015. We're looking at reconstruction efforts on US 36 as a high priority for us, and we've been able to design a plan with a goal of Labor Day 2015 instead of the December 2015 that many of the other projects have. We have some agreements already in place that we can tap into that utilize a shorter time frame, that are quality-based through our MATOC purchasing agreements. We have certain construction resource providers, materials already on contract that we can use to quickly get into a site. And what Mark had mentioned is true. With this emergency response category, we do bring 100% funding to our efforts, and it's not a match with any of the partner agencies.
I just want to clarify a date. You said Labor Day 2015 on 36 or 2014?
2015 for all of the permanent reconstruction to be completed.
So
The work that CDOT is doing right now on 34 from Estes to Drake, those are temporary repairs. Even if it's paved, that's still a temporary repair. They're going to come in and make more permanent repairs on there in the future. When they're making those permanent repairs, they'd like to be able to use County Road 43 as the detour. So the permanent repairs need to be in place on 43 so that that's a viable detour when they're making their permanent repairs on 34. That's the nexus, that's the relationship, the partnership between 43 and 34. When I said we may not be back to normal on 43 by until 2015, the permanent repairs may be in place on County Road 43 before.
But it's still being used as a bypass.
But it's maybe used as a bypass, and that's not going to be, for those residents, that's not going to be back to normal for them. They're going to be carrying US 34 traffic on 43. The improvements may be in place, but the situation is not going to be back to normal.
Okay, and then I thought, and I just want to clarify that I heard 36, US 36 was going to be 2015. Again, is that final?
Yes, that is our current agreement with CDOT.
It's for
And our
2015?
timeline is for 2015.
Okay, all right.
36 or 34?
36.
So both US highways, 36 and 34, are
Well,
2015 targeted?
US 34, I can't speak to that timeline or where the contractors are in its design, but for US 36, that Central Federal Lands will replace the National Guard when they move off of there and begin that permanent construction. That is the Labor Day 2015 date I was speaking of.
Do we know if US 34 will be able to handle, or excuse me, 36, because I understand the damage on 36 isn't as bad as 34 was. Will that be able to handle the tourist level traffic in Estes Park next summer?
We estimate that it will, and that is the design and the betterment planning that we're going through. As that will be a primary corridor for arterial traffic going up to Estes.
Two of the steps we need to go through in terms of making this partnership happen would be sorting out the funding. Is the funding going to go from CDOT, from the federal level to CDOT to Central Federal Lands? Is Larimer County going to be part of that funding scenario somehow? My preference would be not, but that's not really up to me. But we need to figure out how the money's going to flow between these various partners. And then, as I said, we need to work with Jeff to do an assessment, try to get a kind of a scope of work identified enough so that we can put together a memo of agreement to bring to you to formalize this kind of arrangement. I know you can't take action in a work session, but we have struggled mightily to find a downside in this relationship. And we can't find one. We've overturned every rock we can. So we'll be recommending strongly that we try to move forward with this as quickly as we possibly can.
Are you planning on bringing that to admin Tuesday?
I don't know if we'll be able to have something for you by Tuesday, but like I said, as quickly as we can, we're going to get there. Just within the last hour, Todd is going back up to Glen Haven right after this meeting, and even though he's maybe not dressed for it, we've invited Jeff to go along for that preliminary assessment. They want to work with us as quickly as we want to work with them. That's been the nice thing about just this partnership in just the 48 hours we've been working with them.
Thanks.
Very good. Thank you very much for coming, Jeff. We appreciate your partnership with us and
You're welcome.
do everything we can to help you. Is there any other presentation you want to make, Mark?
Not from us. As I said, we have a lot of staff. If you have more detailed questions about specific projects or specific concerns, we're here to answer questions.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. First off, I appreciate your comments about the communications with us, but in my opinion, if there is a choice between coming and talking to us and you being out in the field helping people get back to their homes, I want you out in the field helping people get back to their homes. So you don't owe me any apology for that at all. My two questions are, can you give us any indication of how many people are still isolated because of the roads? I mean, I think a tremendous amount of communities were cut off initially. It seems to me from your presentation that a majority of those communities now have some type of access. Can you give us a percentage of people that are still isolated and cut off without access? Can you give us any rough estimate of how much of this problem you've been able to accomplish in this short amount of time?
You know, I wish I could. I don't think I can give you a reliable number today, but I'll make a commitment that we'll come to admin matters, or we'll work with Linda in her report to try to give you that update next Tuesday. It changes every day. Just this week, as I said, just in the first few days of this week, we've restored access to Storm Mountain, to Cedar Park, Cedar Springs. We've restored access to Crystal Mountain. So we're opening up pockets. The fact that the National Guard has been able to come up 36 has opened up, you know, the lower part of Pinewood. So every day, more and more people are getting access. One of the questions I have is how many people are actually still sheltered in place? I know there are some people in the retreat. I don't know if there are 5 people in the retreat waiting for us to get a road up there, or if there are 105. Mm-hmm. And that would be really useful information for us to know, to truly try to understand what our priorities are. So we have a need for the same information, and I don't have it today, but we'll try to get better information by Tuesday, unless Mark has a rough guess he'll throw out.
No, I don't have a guess. The only thing I was going to clarify is when we say we've restored access to people and they're able to get to Storm Mountain, it's still very limited access because US 34 is only being opened from noon until 5 p.m. on Sundays so that CDOT's contractor can keep working there. So, you know, there's even though the access is there, it's very limited, and so it goes to, you know, expectations and what people are going to be able to do still not being fully met.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard to know what that will look like in the winter when there's snow on the road too.
Right.
But I think I understand that. But I guess my other question is related to the contractors that we have. I mean, it seems from your presentation you had contractors engaged immediately doing work. We have 2 contractors, Connell and Gerard. Do we have sufficient contractors engaged? It sounds like that's not the limiting factor, the number of contractors. It sounds like it's other factors that really we don't have control over. So do we have adequate help engaged?
Right now, I think we do, but I'm going to let Todd Juergens answer in a minute. But we have these existing open-end contracts with Gerard and Connell that said, you know, when we need you for sort of unplanned or things as they come up, rather than go through an elaborate formal process, it's force account work. We can call on them and they can respond. Those were the existing contracts, the existing relationships we had. We also had relationships with 2 engineering consultants to do the same thing, AVI and Benish. Benish is specializing in bridges. So we also utilized those existing open-ended agreements with engineering consultants to do the same thing. Right now, we've been able to work with people like Connell to go out and bring other contractors in as subcontractors when we can and when we need them, when it's productive. One of the problems that you run into in some of the areas we're working in is we're in these little narrow canyons. You can only really productively put 4 excavators and 2 haul trucks and a dozer at the bottom of the County Road 43, the Glen Haven Road. More equipment up there isn't going to make progress any faster. It's just going to get in the way of each other. So I think right now we have enough contractor resources to do what needs to be done right now. As we open up more opportunities to do more, we're going to work with those contractors to bring in additional resources, whether that's equipment or manpower, as necessary. Once we transition from emergency response into permanent repairs, a lot of that work is going to be competitively bid. We're going to be, you know, opening that up to contractors and tapping into larger contractor resources. Todd, did I get that right, or?
Yeah, I think right now contractors, labor, and equipment is not a limiting factor. We've had Connell, Gerard, Colson, and Native Excavating working in various parts of the county, reconstructing roads. We've used Morgan Timber Products and Fine Tree Service to do debris removal under bridges down on the Little Thompson and up on the Pooter. So I feel like we have the equipment and labor that we need right now. We do have commitments from all of those contractors to provide additional equipment and labor as the need arises. And like Mark said, we open up areas where we can be productive with more equipment. The upper end of County Road 43 below Glen Haven, we've got a landslide, potential landslide issue that needs to be resolved. We don't feel it's a safe work area right now. State geologist was up there, made a determination that it was a dangerous slide, although didn't provide any recommendations on what to do about it and how to treat it. So we're bringing in another expert out of Arizona Monday to take a look at that and try to give some recommendations on, okay, this is an issue now, what do we do about it and how do we treat it and make the area safe? Once that's resolved, then we'll be able to move more equipment in on the top end of 43 and head down. And we do have commitments from our contractors to provide that equipment and labor force to get moving up there, so.
Occasionally, we are running into some pinch points like trucking. Yesterday, one of our contractors was short a couple of trucks to try to really be efficient in the backfill of some of the bridges in the Little Thompson. Made a phone call to Dale, and Dale was able to free up a couple of our vehicles. Now, we can't free up our whole fleet because 90% of the county road system is undamaged, and it still needs maintenance. It still needs the same attention it did before. So we have to be able to continuously do our regular work, but when we need to, we can call on our own resources too to try to supplement. That's the nature of these partnerships, and I'll say it for probably the fourth time, cannot say enough good things about the contractors we're working with and their ability to work interchangeably with us, with our staff, and with our resources too.
Those are all the questions that I have.
So, Todd, if you had access to material on the west side of County Road 43, you could get back to work there, assuming you get this landslide situation rectified. Do you have a plan on how you're going to get material or where you're going to get it?
You know, we've been working with the town of Estes to get some of the material out of Lake Estes that they're mining out of there, and Mark had made some contacts, and we do have an agreement for the town to provide material up there. It would need to be trucked down in to the area. Obviously, there's a lot of I say debris, but it's rock and cobble and sand deposited right in the town of Glen Haven. A lot of small lots that were platted in that area, and that material's lying in those areas. Glen Haven's there because there was a little bit of a flatter spot in the canyon. I'd really like to get access to the material that's in the town, and we're working on trying to notify or contact property owners and get agreements to get in there and get that material out. I think we can help clean up the town proper and utilize that material, but there's a large amount of material deposited right in town that can go straight down the canyon. As Mark said, when you come down the canyon from Glen Haven, that's a stretch of the river that was steep, velocities were high, and it literally is just wiped clean to the bedrock. There's no indication there was ever a road in there, and so all of that material needs to be brought in from somewhere else. There aren't earth slopes along the edge of the road that we can dig into to generate the material. It's all rock. So short of drilling and blasting those rock slopes, we're going to need to bring the material from some other location.
The only caveat I'll put to that is it has to be the right material. I mean, particularly in the kind of the narrow area above Glen Haven where it's so difficult and where all the material is scoured, the stream is just right next to the road, and it's constantly, pressuring that road. So we have to have the right material that can stand up to those kind of erosive forces. I think the guy who's heading up the National Guard, Colonel Tran, just strikes me as about as bright a guy as you could possibly know. he told me he has some concerns about the material that's coming out of Lake Estes, that it's very sandy, that it may not be the best material to put in a potentially erosive road slope. So I think that we can use that material in Lake Estes, but we really need to lay eyes on it and make sure it's the right material for the application. So I hope and I think we can utilize some of this material, but it has to be the right material. Otherwise, we're just throwing money down the drain, putting in easily erosive material right next to a very erosive channel.
And that being said, riprap is one of the material sources that we're short everywhere. The existing riprap was generally produced out of the canyons decades ago when the roads were originally built. That material's gone, and we're going to need to try to find sources of stone in these areas to re-armor the slopes of the road along the creek, and that's on County Road 44H, that's on County Road 27 through the Buckhorn, County Road 43. And so, again, we're continuing to try to identify where those sources might be. I think I made the comment the other day, we need to quit thinking about how we build roads in 2013 and try to figure out how they did it in 1920 and 1930, because that's where we're at on a lot of these road stretches. There isn't anything there to fix. It's being replaced and pioneered in again. And, you know, the material was generated on site typically. Putting that amount of material in trucks and trying to haul it to these remote areas can be done, but it's a lot of expense and a lot of time. So we're hoping to acquire material sources, work with the Forest Service, for instance, on the old quarry at Crozier Mountain, and can we reopen that quarry and get material there? Work with private landowners. There's some large landowners up along the Buckhorn that have expressed at least interest in talking to us about quarrying some rock and material off of those properties. It's a fairly quick permitting process when it's for a public project within the geographic area of the project. It's about a 30-day permit process, so we don't think that holds us up. We just need to get agreements with the underlying landowners.
And continuing on from there, Mark, there's some talk that you might try to get some access permits or some use agreements along what they call the Crozier Mountain Road, which is kind of parallel to County Road 43. It starts, you probably are almost, if you're coming from Drake, you're probably almost to the south or to the east end of Crozier Mountain, the road there, and that comes out just below the entrance to the retreat, the Dunraven Glade Road, which is one of those subdivisions can be very difficult to get access back into. Can you tell us about where your negotiations stand as far as maybe reaching some kind of agreement for temporary use of the Crozier Mountain Road to maybe help folks get back into the retreat, at least on a temporary basis?
You know, quite honestly, we're not really in the middle of those negotiations. This is people helping themselves. The people who are in the retreat are really the ones working with the adjacent property owners. And I wish we were closer to that tie-in to Crozier Mountain than we are, but it's still a ways up the slope for us.
So we started at Drake Monday of this week. We're about 1.2 miles up. We have about 1.2 miles left to go to get to that Crozier Mountain access. I've been working with Jim Boyd in the retreat. He's on, my understanding is a member of the Homeowners Association up there. He's their contact, and he and I talk on a fairly regular basis. He's been the one working with the Forest Service, Chenoweths, and Chilsons to get that agreement. He told me yesterday that he had reached an agreement with the Forest Service. They had agreed to allow access across the forest property, and the agreements with Chenoweth and Chilson were contingent on that Forest Service agreement. So he believes he has what he needs in place there, and really what they're waiting on is for us to get to the lower end of Crozier Mountain Drive. And again, we're just over a mile away yet. I'll be up there this afternoon. I'll have a better idea how work progressed yesterday and today.
Yeah, I have a few other specific, so Todd, maybe I need you to answer them. Does everyone, do all homeowners on Fish Creek Road have some type of temporary access to their home for vehicular access, or is there anybody who still has only foot or ATV access or something like that?
You know, I'm probably not the best one to answer that. I'm not sure where we're at. I believe we have access to all of those areas off of Fish Creek, but I haven't been as involved in that stretch of road.
And I anecdotally, I think there are still a couple of isolated spots where we don't have complete access. One of the things that we've done just this week is one of our former road and bridge employees who retired earlier this year still lives in the Estes Park area, a guy named Lonnie Barrett. He was one of our functional group managers, one of our top road and bridge employees. And we've hired him as a contract employee so that we'll have boots on the ground every day. And one of the things that I want him to be working on is trying to get those accesses improved to those folks along Fish Creek who don't have it yet. I think there may be a handful, but I'm it's like I told you earlier, I don't have as much information about who's still landlocked and how many people that I wish I had.
Like Matt might actually have a little information on that. He was actually up there in Estes Park.
2 weeks ago. There are still several homes, I don't have an exact number, where they're cut off and probably will be for some time. Just with the extreme repairs of Fish Creek Road with the utilities and whatnot. It's going to be some time before even temporary access. Mainly, I think these homes are in and around Carriage Hills, the Little Valley intersection with Fish Creek Road, and then around the bend as Fish Creek kind of veers towards the west. There's a handful of driveways that intersect Fish Creek and have drastic cuts in the road, so I don't think anyone's been up there to fill those in. So, but Little Valley has a temporary bridge. There's 2 or 3 temporary bridges, low water crossings that the town put in to get people access as best as possible along Fish Creek. So.
And that still remains our high priority. I mean, we still want to try to get these properties accessible as quickly as possible. That was our #1 goal the day after the rain stopped, and that's still our primary goal. In some cases, those accesses are more difficult to obtain than others. But.
And then just briefly, you talked about Pinewood Springs. Do you know what the extent folks have vehicular access in that area?
Again, Matt was up there. Most of the lower area of Pinewood Springs is now accessible because they have some, albeit limited, access to Highway 36. There are a couple bridges out. There are still some properties that are behind those bridges. What we'll be doing next, now that we can gain access to Pinewood Springs, is put some low water crossings in, some temporary crossings to try to connect those isolated properties with Highway 36 and the rest of Pinewood. So that's one of our next projects.
Okay, and then
not rebuild the bridges that are gone, but to try to create some temporary low water type
crossings.
of accesses.
Okay, and then you mentioned the state will bring in some box culverts tomorrow on County Road 47. You'll install those, or the state will install those?
The National Guard.
The National Guard's going to have them installed this weekend, and then our contractor is mobilized into there next week.
The National Guard was going to pick up the box culverts, 10 sections of box culvert, and deliver them to the site tomorrow, and then they were going to begin installing them on Saturday. So they had hoped by Monday that first crossing will be done. And that was that big push up the hill that we can help our contractor with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you have any idea when that'll be restored completely? Do you have any?
No, as I said earlier, that's a tough one because we don't know, and Gerard doesn't know either, how much rock they're going to run into. Until they actually start there, it's really hard to give an estimate. In general, things have worked faster than our initial impression. I think we're making headway on 44H faster than we first thought. I think we're making headway on 43 faster than we first thought, but we're also starting at the places that we're going to make the most progress earlier, and then it's going to slow down as we get into the more and more difficult places.
Okay.
That reminded me of another question, Mark. As citizens have questions about their particular segment of road, what is the best way for them to get the most updated, current information? Is it your weekly bulletins that we post on our website, or how is the best way for citizens to find out what's happening with each one of these roads?
I'll let Mark address that. We're working on something that's even more real-time than those weekly updates.
The IT department is actually working on a GIS map that can be rolled out and be utilized to help provide some of that information. We had actually created a sort of a stopgap measure within engineering just to try to get some of that information out there, and it's being really revised and enhanced by FITD.
And when will that be available?
I don't know what the schedule on the FITD, the IT map rollout is. Again, we've got that information up currently and are trying to keep it, what we have up there.
So the best source is your webpage that you have right now? Okay.
And then the Road and Bridge Department, keeps a pretty detailed list of road closures that's updated, on a very frequent basis.
Okay.
So it's a tabular listing of what's up there.
Okay. Good. I'm done.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mark, I just had a general comment for you, and this was an excellent presentation. I wanted to pass that on. You'd bring things up which would trigger questions from me, and then 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, sometimes a little later, you would answer those questions. You'd made, and a stark example of that is you were talking about the mudslides and the danger there, and I was wondering how are we going to deal with that, or what are some of the options, and then you addressed that. Just to give it very specific. So I think this was an excellent presentation for me. You answered almost every question I had during it, and I had a lot. It was just very thorough and very good, and I wanted to thank you and congratulate you on that.
Well, thank you very much.
That's it, Steve.
Well, if I might, one of the big questions that will come up is going to be the local roads that are out there that are not county maintained, but it's public rights of way, it's sustained potentially significant damage. We might have bridge structures that have either been destroyed or, again, are damaged. As public roads, they're probably going to be eligible for FEMA reimbursement at some level, but there's still going to be that local match component that's going to be necessary to undertake improvements. And beyond that, it's somebody has to front the cost of all those improvements to begin with and then seek reimbursement, and that would logically be Larimer County. So that's really one area that it seems like we're going to need some direction from the board in terms of allocation of resources towards those types of unusual needs that we wouldn't normally be involved with.
And along those same lines, there are some specific policy questions that we're going to have to come to you, that we will come to you in an admin matter setting where you can actually make decisions. For instance, on the PIDs, those are, the public improvement districts that are out there. They've sustained quite a bit of damage, $2 million roughly. There is a 12.5% local match. We think FEMA will cover 75%, the state will cover half of the 25% local match, but there's that 12.5%. In some cases, those PIDs operate with almost no reserves. I mean, they're not really geared to respond to this kind of emergency any more than we are or a homeowner is. But there are some policy questions like that we'll be coming to you and saying, do you want to borrow money from reserves and try to make arrangements for these PIDs to pay it back over time? Are these an issue that you want to go ahead and invest the 12.5% in directly? But we'll try to get better ideas of just exactly what are those amounts of money and then bring those specific policy questions to you.
Are there further questions for the panelists? Is there anything else you want to add, Linda? Are there any other presentations this morning?
No, I would just make the commissioners aware that we have been contacted by CDOT about updating the board on a periodic basis, and we're making arrangements for them to come every other week for a quick update on what they've accomplished and what they see ahead. So if that is a suitable time frame for the board to receive those updates, we'll finalize those dates.
Okay.
I'm taking the 3 nods, isn't it okay?
I only nodded once, but, all right, anything else? Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.